You don't realize it, but it's always been there. The father wound, the one that makes you push yourself harder than anyone else ever pushed you, that makes you doubt your own worth even when everyone around you has already recognized it. That makes you choose, without understanding why, exactly the kind of love that hurts the same way that absence once did. It doesn't need an empty house to exist. It can be the father who left early and never came back. It can be the father who lived right there, sitting at the same table every single day, but who was never really present, because real presence isn't about being in the same room, it's about seeing, about validating, about making a child feel like they exist in someone's eyes. It can be the father who was too rigid, who only knew how to criticize. The father who was absent because of work, addiction, untreated depression, or a wound of his own, never healed, passed down without meaning to. It doesn't matter which exact shape that absence took in your story. What matters is what it left behind. Carl Jung gave it a name: the father complex, a set of unconscious emotions, memories, and reactions built around the image of the father, one that keeps driving decisions decades later, even when the person no longer consciously remembers where any of it came from. And the most dangerous thing about this complex is exactly that. It operates in the dark. Most people carrying this wound never connect the dots. They don't realize that the merciless self-criticism they carry, that inner voice that never lets them rest, that never accepts a mistake, that always demands more, was often born right there in that old, desperate attempt to finally earn the kind of look that never fully came. People call this daddy issues, half joking, half serious, a phrase that gets thrown around online to point at exactly this kind of pattern. But what's underneath that phrase is no joke at all, and it goes far beyond some stereotype about being attracted to the wrong partners. And that's what I want to talk to you about today, calmly, in depth, and most importantly, with a real practical path to healing by the end, because understanding a wound without knowing how to treat it only ends up hurting you again. The first step to understanding the father complex is understanding what the father figure represents, symbolically, inside the psyche. Jung explained that while the mother represents the first contact with nurturing, with the inner world, with emotional nourishment, the father represents the first contact with the outer world: rules, boundaries, structure, the courage to take risks outside the safety of home. It's through the relationship with this figure that a child learns, in a very primitive way, whether the world out there is safe to explore, or whether it's a place where she'll be alone, with no backup, with no one to confirm that she's capable. When this figure fails, whether through physical absence, emotional coldness, or excessive criticism, the child doesn't process it rationally. She processes it as a structural failure in the very ground she was learning to walk on. And it's fascinating how this complex disguises itself as adult personality. Some people carry this wound through an exaggerated, almost hostile independence, a refusal to need anyone because deep down they learned too early that depending on someone meant setting yourself up for a guaranteed letdown. And others carry the opposite, a constant hunger for approval, from bosses, from partners, from any authority figure at all, unknowingly trying to fill that empty space that's been open since childhood. Jung said that whatever doesn't become conscious shows up as fate, and maybe there's no better sentence to describe this pattern. You keep repeating in the present, a script that was written decades ago by someone who may not have even realized how much of it he was writing. In men, this complex tends to show up as a compulsive need for performance-based validation. They grew up believing they only deserve space, respect, or love if they produce, if they win, if they keep proving their capability over and over. And behind that, almost always, is the same repeated scene: a father who only showed any kind of pride when there was a result to show for it, never simply because his son existed. In women, the father complex tends to show up differently, through what Jung called a wounded animus, the internal representation of the masculine, shaped directly by the relationship with the father. When that relationship was marked by absence, criticism, or instability, the animus forms distorted and starts acting as an unconscious filter for choices. a recurring attraction to unavailable, controlling, or emotionally distant partners, as if through them, the woman were unknowingly trying to settle a score that was never closed with the original father. There's also a dimension of this complex that rarely gets talked about: how you relate to authority outside the home. Bosses, teachers, any kind of power figure tend to trigger without warning the exact same emotional reaction a child once had toward her father. Someone who never had room to disagree at home often grows up with an extreme difficulty saying no to anyone who seems to occupy that symbolic role. And someone who only got attention by causing problems often, without realizing it, keeps stirring up unnecessary conflict as an adult just to make sure they're still seen. And here's the most important part of this whole reflection. Healing this wound, most of the time, doesn't depend on reconciling with the actual father. Some people manage to rebuild that relationship, and that can absolutely bring real healing. But many others will never get that chance, whether because the father is already gone or because the relationship will never reach a safe place. And even so, healing is still entirely possible because, as Jung explained, what actually keeps a person trapped isn't the external father, it's the internal image of him, the psychic figure that stays active inside the mind, judging, demanding, pressuring, even decades after any real contact. And that's exactly why there's a practice, recommended by many therapists, including those who work with family constellation therapy, that helps deeply with this process of inner reconstruction. Writing a letter to your father. Not a polished, organized, perfectly logical letter. A letter that will never be sent, that isn't meant for him to read, but that exists to set you free. Write down everything you were never able to say. The pain, the anger, the absence, the disappointment, the emptiness, the confusion, the silence that sat between you. Write what you felt when he didn't look at you, what you wanted to hear, and never did. All the times you tried to shapeshift, disappear, mold yourself just to be noticed. It doesn't need to be in order or make perfect sense. Just write it as it comes. If you need to curse, curse. If you need to cry, cry. When you're done, read it out loud. If you can, look yourself in the eyes in the mirror while you read. Let the words move through you, not to reopen the wound, but to release what's been trapped inside for so long. And then say thank you for what was given and for what wasn't, but still somehow brought you here. And burn the letter. Really burn it. Turn this moment into a small ritual. Because that gesture says, without a single word, I'm done waiting. I'm done carrying this. I choose to let it go. There are other practices that support this same process of inner reconstruction. One is writing to your own inner child, picturing yourself at your current age standing in front of the boy or girl you once were. What did that child need to hear and never did? What would you say to them now, the words no one ever had the courage to say back then? Write it all down, and if you can, read it out loud. Another practice is the empty chair technique. Sit facing an empty chair, imagine your father sitting there, and talk to him. Say everything that's been stuck inside you, no logic required, just letting the emotion move out of your body. There's another layer to this wound that often goes unnoticed: how you handle your own success. A lot of people carrying the father complex, without even knowing it, live inside a strange cycle of self-sabotage, where right at the moment things start going well, something inside seems to pull the emergency brake. Jung explained this as part of the dynamic between the wounded ego and the self, the true center of the psyche. When a child never received the message that she deserved good things simply by existing, the adult she becomes has real trouble sustaining her own achievements, because deep down, she's still waiting to be exposed, still expecting someone to point out that she isn't enough. And so success turns into a threat instead of a win, and self-sabotage becomes an unconscious way of keeping the old story alive. There's also a practice connected directly to what Jung called active imagination, consciously engaging in dialogue with your wounded inner parts, the hurt child, the symbolic father figure, the critical voice that won't let up. These inner encounters, strange as they might feel at first, open up real paths of transformation because they allow the psyche to process, symbolically, what never had room to be processed in real life. Slowly, you start treating yourself with more respect, saying enough when it's needed, understanding that taking care of yourself isn't selfish, it's love. And as that inner presence starts to settle in, something shifts, quietly, but for good. The world that once felt like a permanent courtroom, constantly demanding proof of your worth, starts turning into a place where you can simply exist. And maybe for the first time, you feel like you can be yourself without having to prove anything to anyone. Healing the wound of an absent father is, in the end, about stepping out of the war, about no longer living on the defensive, about no longer waiting for outside validation to feel like you deserve to exist. Because deep down, this wound was never really about him. It was always about how you learned to see yourself through his eyes. And when that reflection changes, the entire inner landscape reorganizes itself. If this content touched something in you, write it down in the comments. I've decided to set myself free. That way, I'll know you made it all the way here, for real, and that you're ready to take this step consciously. And if you want to keep going deeper on this journey, consider subscribing to the channel, because we're going to keep this conversation going right here. Thank you for being here, for listening with an open heart, and for being part of this space of transformation. See you in the next video.